I'm not even going to explain how I have this information. And I'm not gonna be giving away any major story spoilers because I have common decency. Instead, I'll just talk about the game world, new enemies, gameplay differences, etc. I will say that this game is definitely not $70 Sky Island DLC, and Nintendo is doing a crap job of marketing Tears of the Kingdom, so I'm gonna go out of my way to do it myself. If you don't want to watch all of this and just want to know my verdict, I personally give it a 9.5 out of 10 and I like this game more than Breath of the Wild, which was a solid 9 out of 10 game for me. Note, throughout the video, I will give my personal thoughts on the different aspects of the game. The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom starts about 3 years after the events of The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. The game will reuse the same map as Breath of the Wild, but it will become significantly altered and destroyed through the story events of Tears of the Kingdom, which will become more apparent as the game progresses. Tears of the Kingdom overall will have a much darker tone than Breath of the Wild, and this darker tone will be manifested through the different aspects of the game, such as the story, enemies, etc. The name Tears of the Kingdom itself can have multiple interpretations. Tears as in crying, refers to the darker themes, tone, and motifs of the game, in addition to special story items that Link will collect throughout the game. Tears can also refer to tearing apart, and the destruction that will overcome the Hyrule map in this game. Tears also sounds like tears, which can also refer to the new frontiers like the Sky Islands and that will be available to explore in this game. One major aspect of this game is that the Sacred Realm has merged into the game world after the destructive awakening of Incarnate Ganondorf, and manifests as giant floating islands in the sky that Link can travel to through different means. Based on what has been shown in the recent trailers, the Sky Islands, which will come to be known as the Remnants, are much more expansive than what has been shown already. There are 2 major settlements that float in the sky, Mittani Village and the city of Tasukama. Tasukama is basically the home of the last remaining Zonai, and you'll meet most of the important story characters. The Construct Race, which were shown off in the gameplay demo, are ancient robots that take on different forms, yet all have the same blue-green Zonai aesthetic. Some of the variants of these robotic entities, such as the Ranger Construct, are friendly to Link, and give him information and lore regarding the Sky Islands. The Rangers are also the ones who maintain the remnants by planting and tending to the goddess trees that inhabit the islands. The Soldier and Warden Constructs, however, are hostile to Link and will attack on sight. The Warden Construct itself is a mini-boss, the first boss you fight, and is that giant blocky entity from the most recent trailer. There are also 3 other Construct types, the Dragon Construct, which drops a flamethrower part that Link can fuse to his shield or certain handheld weapons. The Sentry, which just hides and alerts soldiers and scalers to your presence. And the Scaler Constructs, which are just soldiers but with the ability to scale and climb walls. Openings to the underground have appeared across the Hyrule map, and these openings lead to an extensive underground cave system. Across the caverns are different biomes with small ruins, enemy types, and fused materials. There are different tiers to the underground caves, with biomes closer to the surface resembling more of the aesthetic of the surface biomes in Hyrule. However, as Link explores deeper into the caves, the biomes take on a more fungal and alien aesthetic. One major point of interest occurs near the deepest depths of the world, and that is at the Forgotten City, which Link will eventually learn is the ancient Zonai city of Dumorin. This area is a massive deserted underground cavern filled with Zonai temples and buildings. The city's architecture resembles much of the architecture created by Mesoamerican peoples and reminds me of depictions of Tenochtitlan. Link will visit parts of the city throughout the game, but can only advance to new areas of Dumorin once he gains greater power and strength through the various dungeons and Tears of the Kingdom. The size of Dumorin is easily about a quarter the size of the Hyrule map, and the city itself is located within a dangerous underground biome that covers the lower area of the caves called the Gorge. There are a bunch of other underground caverns and biomes, but I'll talk more about the enemies. Like are returning, in addition to Pehots and Moldrums. There are also reskinned variants of the Moblins, Bokoblins, and Lizalfos enemy types that stalk the upper tiers of the caverns near the surface. Due to story reasons, Link has this new arm which grants him new abilities. The first 4 are the abilities highlighted in the gameplay demo, so I'll talk about them briefly while adding some clarifying info. The first ability is Fuse. The Fuse ability allows Link to fuse almost any 2 items together to create weapons, including existing weapons and shields. It also allows him to fuse any item in his inventory to his arrows, which provide unique buffs and aspects to the arrows. This system will address the weapon durability concerns, as it allows Link to fuse two of the same weapon together to increase durability, or other items to damaged weapons to further increase the durability, and possibly give said weapon a buff. It is important to note that you can only fuse two items together. You cannot fuse another item to an already fused weapon or tool. The Ultra Hand ability is similar to Fuse, except Ultra Hand fuses other items together, in order to create vehicles, platforms, and other contraptions. Amongst the Sky Islands, Link can find Zonai technology, such as fans and batteries that extend the lifespan of the tech. These items can power self-made vehicles that race, fly, or surf around the world. You can also complete optional Towery Town-like side missions where you can build new settlements and add on to already existing towns, which is actually really fun. The Recall ability allows Link to rewind the movement for a singular object, such as a boulder rolling down a mountain, or a piece of the remnants falling down to the ground. This is the main way that players can reach the remnants, although there are other ways too, such as using Ultra Hand to build a floating platform. Also, if an object hits an object that is being recalled, it will affect the movement of said object, so just be careful and mindful. The Ascend ability allows Link to jump up and no-clip through the ceiling up to the nearest ground. There are a few restrictions, but this ability is super useful in the caves and for traveling amongst closely clumped together Sky Islands. The abilities that I highlighted above are the abilities that Link receives at the beginning of the game, but by completing certain dungeons, Link can acquire more arm abilities. The Morph ability works similarly to Cappy in Super Mario Odyssey A, that is, the Morph ability allows Link to possess malice enemy types and control them. This is super useful in avoiding and creating new and unique combat opportunities, and infiltrating enemy ranks, especially in the Horde's underground where it can become congested. This arm ability was shown off in the title reveal trailer and creates a giant platform when Link is falling in the sky from the remnants and allows him to glide great distances over the Hyrule map in short amounts of time. Glide essentially eliminates the need for ground traversal, which is useful later on as the map and enemies dynamically become more dangerous. While technically not a separate arm ability itself, Descend is just an extension of Ascend and acts in an opposite manner, by allowing Link to no-clip through the ground to the nearest ceiling below. The grapple allows Link's arm to become a long rope itself and grab onto certain, Zonai checkered, surfaces to swing across chasms, in addition to grappling onto certain walls to run across them. This ability is useful both in the Sky Islands and the caves, as the runes in both areas are Zonai themed and have the checkered surfaces that Link can grapple onto. There are 7 mandatory story dungeons that Link has to complete, but there are also 4 optional dungeons that contain the 4 other arm abilities I mentioned above: Morph, Glide, Descend, Grapple, and yes, the game can be completed without these other abilities, although I would not recommend going through the game without them. There are 7 total story dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom, and in contrast to the freedom and open world nature of Breath of the Wild, these dungeons sort of have to be completed in a particular order. The first dungeon, the Construct Manufactory, must be completed first. The next 3 dungeons can be completed in any order: Hydra Citadel, the Farron Mines, and the Dumorin Sanctuary. The last 3 must be completed in a certain order as follows: the Sheikah Archives, the Zonai Observatory and Research Labs, and the Ark of Dumorin in order to reach Incarnate Gendorf. Each story dungeon is uniquely themed-ish and has a variety of puzzles that you must complete. What is cool about these dungeons is that they reward Link for completing the optional dungeons, explained below. To gain the other arm abilities, puzzles become easier to complete, and each story dungeon takes less time overall to master. The first 4 dungeons are rather short, sort of like the Divine Beast dungeons, but still fun enough and unique enough to where I didn't have much of a problem. The last dungeons are much longer and overall more fun to complete, but at the same time, they are much more difficult. The Construct Manufactory is the first of the dungeons that you have to complete, and it is an abandoned Zonai factory, industrial building. There was nothing really noteworthy about this dungeon because it was more like a tutorial dungeon than anything else. Even the boss, the Manufactory Warden, is just a larger version of the Warden Construct. Hydra Citadel is the structure that materializes beneath the raging storm above Hydra Peak. It is similar in aesthetic to the first dungeon, but with more of a nice theme. Again, it is not really noteworthy. The boss is called Frozen Ancient Edoran and takes the form of a giant wizrobe-like sorcerer. It was just a damage sponge, hit it enough times and you kill it. Then you can complete the Farron Mines, which is a Zonai ruins below the Farron region in the highest cavern tier. This dungeon was pretty cool, as it featured more diverse terrain and natural puzzles. The boss was called Burrowing Fiend, Tramarat, and was a giant horned worm that would burrow beneath you and attack from below if you stayed in one spot too long. You kill it in a way similar to a Molduga, but Tramarat has a second phase where it would slither after you. Just use shroom bombs to stun it and hit its one eye, rinse and repeat until it dies. Then there was the Dumoran Sanctuary, which is a large temple on the outskirts of the city. Another standard dungeon, and it kinda reminded me of Skyview Temple from SS in terms of aesthetics, overgrown and crumbling. The boss was called Corrupted Berserker, Zonarik, and is a stupidly difficult warrior-type boss that was similar to the Stalfos mini-bosses from Skyward Sword. The last 3 dungeons were definitely better than the first 4, as they featured more segments and diversity in the aesthetics and enemies. The first one you have to complete is the Shiika Archives, which is this library, museum-themed dungeon. It is located in the pit beneath the elevated height Hyrule Castle. You first explore the upper levels of this structure, which is the museum segment. This area has a bunch of artifacts and skeletons of different creatures on display around the different rooms, and the enemies you face are the malice-infused versions of these skeletons. You have to find the 4 hidden keys in the museum in order to reach the archives below. Once you ultra-hand the complete key, you have to fight the returning boss Malice Incarnate, Slord, which takes on the appearance of a humanoid white gunman with bones. To kill this boss, you have to weaken the arm and leg joints until it has no more malice, and then destroy the exposed bone matter until Slord has nothing to rebuild itself with. Once you destroy the entire body until only the head remains, just destroy the head. After the first boss, you can travel further below to find the Library, Archive section of this dungeon. The Library, Archive section is much more difficult than the previous section, and the main enemy type here is giant spiders. You don't have to find any keys here, but you just have to travel to lower and lower regions while fighting off increasingly larger spider enemies. Once you reach the bottom of the Shiika Archives, you will be in the spider nest, and have to face Arachnid Abomination, Mavistra. This boss has the ability to climb the walls and teleports around the arena, shooting weeb attacks and attacking from above. You just have to shoot it in its eyes to stun Mavistra, then attack the abdomen. The boss can summon spider enemies while regenerating health, so just be wary. This was certainly my favorite of the dungeons. The Zanai Observatory is located high amongst the remnants, essentially in the highest tier of the world you can explore. You first have to complete the lower section of the dungeon, which is just a control station so you can gain access to the observatory and research lab. The enemies here are just pure malice manifestations, taking on a variety of different forms. Once you complete the lower puzzle, you can explore the upper dungeon. The idea here is to reassemble the central orrery in the observatory by exploring the research lab and surrounding areas. Once Link has reassembled the central orrery, Malice corrupts the orrery structure itself, and it becomes my personal favorite boss in the game, an ethereal planet Malice structure called Twisted Celestial, Malignarium. You have to use Sonai-charged fused arrows in order to land any damage to this thing, and hit the planet objects you assembled on the structure. The only attacks the boss has is shooting charged malice at you, and using its arms to try to crush you. Once you stun each of the planet structures enough, you have to climb on top of this boss and destroy each of the 4 energy outlets on the back of this thing. You have to complete this step quickly because Malignarium will shock Link with electricity and cause him to fall off. Once each of the power outlets is destroyed, the head or sun object of Malignarium will disassemble itself and float around attacking Link. Really, the best way to kill this boss is to use the grapple ability to climb onto it and hit it with your weapons, but if you didn't complete the optional dungeons to get that ability, you can just spam shoot the boss with arrows until it dies. Overall, the puzzles in this dungeon were the most creative and enjoyable in my opinion, and the Zanai Observatory and Research Lab took me the longest to complete out of any of the dungeons. 10 out of 10 dungeon and boss. This is the final part of the game, so I'm going to keep this one brief because there are a lot of story spoilers, but the arc is located in the middle of Dumoran. The dungeon itself is fine, but certainly the least interesting out of the 3 final dungeons in my opinion. The aesthetic is similar to the Dumoran Sanctuary but with a lot more enemy types and puzzles. The final boss, guessed by anyone with half a brain, is Ganondorf, or as he is called in this game, Gerudo Incarnate, Ganondorf. He basically spends the entire game rehydrating himself, which is funny because of the meme associated with that idea. The final design of Ganondorf reminded me immediately of the kind of proportions in Wind Waker Ganon, but a bit more realistic artistically obviously. It was different from the muscular version in Ocarina of Time, but instead just an immense broad-shouldered, broad-chest kind of design. The fight itself, gameplay-wise, was great, my second favorite behind Malignarium. It was a multi-phase fight lasting 3 sections where you have to dehydrate Ganondorf in order to kill him. The ending was very interesting story-wise. A broken bar and sets up a very interesting timeline shift. I'll leave it at that for now. There are also side content besides the main story. There are optional dungeons and to be honest, They are just the elevated labyrinths from Breath of the Wild and do not require Link to complete them in a particular order. They follow their own secondary storyline, which ties nicely into the main story and doesn't feel disconnected or separate in any way. Despite being optional dungeons, they are on par with the first 4 story dungeons, but overall, they are relatively boring like the Divine Beasts. The bosses for each of the optional dungeons are not unique in any way either, just being the same boss but with slight variations. The dungeons are as follows: Akala Labyrinth, Hybra Labyrinth, Gerudo Labyrinth, and another new Zonai Labyrinth that rises out of the ground in the Lanera province. Because they are elevated in the sky now, there is a lot more to explore in these structures. Your main goal is to reach the core of each labyrinth after running through a 3D maze solving different puzzles to progress. The boss in each area is just a variation of the Zonai Dragon construct, which becomes easier to beat the further along you are in the game. There are other side content like the Zonai Trials. The Zonai Trials are denoted by a giant boulder surrounded by green swirly Zonai magic, which have been seen in the trailers and the art book, and they essentially replace the shrines from Breath of the Wild. The Zonai Trials are also unique in their own sense, as in contrast to Breath of the Wild, there are only 36 trials, but each trial takes more time to complete, and in my opinion, is much more fun and engaging. Trials are also different from Breath of the Wild, as most of them are not mini dungeons, but quests. At the beginning of each trial is the ghost of a trapped Zonai who needs Link to complete the task for them. These tasks can range from defeating a powerful boss to solving a Breath of the Wild shrine-like puzzle, collecting items while being hunted down, like the trials in Skyward Sword, or completing a stealth section, similar to the Yiga Clan quest. After successfully completing the trial, the trapped Zonai ghost will enhance Link A, which essentially increases his damage potential and combat, walking, running, climbing, and swimming speeds, decreases the amount of damage taken from a hit, etc. Link is given a skill tree in his arm, and he can dedicate these enhancements toward those branches on the skill tree. Again, I'm not going to reveal any spoilers for the story, but I will say that it is much more linear than Breath of the Wild's story. Imagine Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword. Take that information as you will.